Thanks, Ella. Good afternoon. It's that time of day you're either very energized after the coffee break or desperately looking forward to a very cold glass of something. So I'm going to keep this short. I'm going to try and keep it interesting. We're talking about aviation and the impact of rapid air growth, air travel growth can have on heritage. I want to set the scene briefly by talking a little about how this growth has come about, then move on to the cost this has in heritage terms, before covering a little bit about how we assess it. Firstly, let me start with the final bullet point on this slide to set the scene a little bit, because you've probably never heard of me or Energized Environments. We formed in July 2013, so we've got a birthday coming up in a week or so, when 4 former WSP directors decided they wanted to offer clients a more flexible boutique service on energy and environmental consultancy. They started out on day one with one client who was an onshore wind farm developer and a wealth of experience. And the company has since grown to be 40 strong, operating in almost all sectors, offering environmental planning, energy, and technical advice to a variety of clients and sectors, large and small. Our team is made up of specialists with a variety of backgrounds and previous lives, and we each bring our past experience to our new clients, applying a little bit of learning from our past to each project. We've also acquired a renewables consultancy in that time, a company called ITPEnergised, so we've added to our portfolio and recently rebranded to ITPEnergised at the end of last year. Now, I mentioned we all bring a bit of experience from our previous life, and this is why I'm standing here today. A few years ago, I was heavily involved in the national aviation expansion debate. I acted on behalf of Heathrow Hub, who was putting forward a very novel approach to aviation expansion. And they were working up their plans to submit to the Airports Commission that was set up by David Cameron to decide what aviation expansion was required, if it was required, and how that might look. As Ella said, I'm not a heritage specialist, so I may not get all the heritage terms right, so do bear with me and apologies. I'm an EIA manager. I do have an appreciation of the heritage assets and the methods of assessing them because it's part of my work. But my expertise lies in considering a proposed development as a whole, determining the significant environmental effects it may lead to, and balancing the mitigation measures and residual effects across that development. So where there might be conflicting mitigation from one effect and one measure, how can we agree and identify and agree how we can change that so that it has the least impact on that particular asset without compromising others at the same time. Catherine, this morning, raised an important point. Oh, sorry, I'm too slow. Catherine raised an important point this morning. She said infrastructure is the foundation upon which our economy is built. I completely agree. But that raises a whole series of questions. What is the price that we must pay to keep our economy strong and competitive on a global platform? What are the trade-offs that we must make in order to keep our infrastructure up to date and still maintain those crucial links to our heritage? Aviation has grown substantially over the last couple of decades. There's been the growth of low-cost airlines, there's been a reduction in ticket prices, and there's been an increased desire and ability for international travel. This growth has largely come about in the smaller, more regional airports, Manchester being one of them, also Stansted, Luton, further afield, Southampton, even the very small airports such as Southend. It's mainly due to the growth in low-cost airlines, but also the growth in charter flights, again, that ability for low-cost travel that we've all got. There's also been a demand for just-in-time deliveries, or an increased demand for just-in-time deliveries, fast movement of materials around the globe, and that means that a significant amount of freight now travels in the belly of aircraft rather than by sea, which again increases that need for air travel. We've got emerging markets such as China, India, countries in South America. They've also led to an increased demand for slots and a growth in air traffic. Consequently, established airlines are growing, new airlines are being created almost on a weekly basis, and there's an associated growth in airport facilities. All these factors will have an impact on local, regional, and national economies. Add them all together, there's an unprecedented pressure on aviation capacity and the need to expand in order to remain competitive on that global platform. As well as the benefits that come with any development, there will be a cost. As an EIA manager, it's not unusual for me to have to balance the various issues and determine where there may be a need for some negotiation with stakeholders to reduce that level of mitigation that might be required for a particular issue, or the enhancement that they're looking for, so as not to worsen a significant effect elsewhere. We seek to expand airports and make our airspace work harder in order to increase our competitiveness on the global platform, global stage. It also benefits local and regional economies through the creation of jobs and supporting industries. That could be the construction industry, it could be local businesses. However, the density of population around transport hubs, particularly in the southeast of England, means that there's a plethora of heritage assets that will experience some form of impact through that aviation expansion. The way I see it, there are two types of impacts: direct and indirect, or intangible. Direct impacts could include potential loss of assets. For example, Harmondsworth Barn could have been lost in one of the earlier Heathrow Airport plans. That's since changed. There could be the addition of secondary windows to buildings to mitigate noise impacts. There could be structural improvements to mitigate for vibration impacts. There are also indirect impacts, and those could include things like conservation areas, airplanes affecting the setting of a conservation area or the setting of a registered park and garden. This would be through the increased noise associated with aviation expansion and the overflight of aircraft. One example that we came across on the Heathrow project would be the impact on Kew Gardens and the Arcadian Thames, people's enjoyment of what is meant to be a tranquil and open space. Another example, again from down south, is the impact of a potential expansion of Gatwick Airport on Hever Castle. As well as a heritage asset in its own right as a building, it also puts on quite a lot of evening events in the summer months and is a tourist attraction. So the noise generated by passing aircraft on the approach to Gatwick could affect how that operates as a business. It could reduce visitor numbers and it could reduce income. Could it result in a curtailment of business in the long run? Could it result in closure as a business? And what knock-on effect would that have on the economy? When we consider the implications of a proposed development, there are a series of steps that we need to take. Within the EIA process, each topic must be assessed on its own and a conclusion drawn on whether there's likely to be any significant environmental effects. The assessment methods will vary between each topic. Some are quantifiable, such as noise or air quality. Some are more subjective, and heritage is one of those. How do you determine enjoyment of an asset, of a heritage asset, or its setting within a changing environment? We live in a rapidly evolving world, and while most of us live in apartments, not places like Hever Castle, how do we determine where we draw that line between what's considered to interfere with our enjoyment of an asset or a historic building? Where do we even begin to do that when we each view heritage and its importance differently? When it comes to aviation expansion, the biggest issue is undoubtedly noise. Aviation noise is measured differently to how you'd measure noise from a railway line or a road, which are linear sources, or a point source such as a manufacturing plant. Because aircraft are passing overhead, there's a cone of noise that covers a much larger area. And it's also measured as an averaged sound over a period of months. Noise in itself can be quite subjective because different people perceive it in different ways. What might bother one person might not bother another quite as much. Historic England does have guidance on assessing the setting of heritage assets, and it recognises all of the different things that can affect it, including noise. But it doesn't give any guidance on thresholds or what weight should be attributed to an impact, such as noise, or consider the different sources and types of noise that might be associated with different developments. Again, the difference between aviation noise and road noise, for example. So that subjectivity is further compounded. You don't only have the asset and its setting and the subjectivity of assessing that to a degree, but the impacts associated with it as well. But for the sake of argument, let's assume that we've reached agreement on how to quantify and apply various parameters to heritage assessment. And we conclude that, for example, noise in itself is not an issue. It's not going to lead to significant effects on the setting or the enjoyment of a historic building. Perhaps we can also conclude that the physical impacts are not significant, or that the visual impacts of passing aircraft are not an issue. But they're not isolated issues, and we have to start considering them in combination, and that's where the tricky bit starts. What happens when we consider the potential noise, visual impact, and vibration effects, for example, associated with aviation expansion on a particular asset in combination? Could that change the conclusion? What might not be significant for one on its own, in combination with the others? Could it actually lead to a significant effect, which we then need to deal with? Let's then take that one step further. Taken within the wider context of the local, regional, and national economy, what are the trade-offs between the economic benefits of aviation expansion and the potentially significant effects on a historic building and its enjoyment? Catherine posed a question this morning, which was very relevant, and I've jotted it down and will bring it back up for now, and it's something that I'd like to leave you with as a thought. How can heritage as a sector be more relevant? I would say that in the particular case of aviation, it's by working with the other disciplines to find solutions that minimize impacts or enhance buildings in a holistic way. We need to negotiate how one thing might be changed slightly so that we still have the benefit of expansion or change without completely losing our heritage. In my view, I think that in this way, future generations will hopefully look back at what we're building now and think it's just as important and well done in heritage terms as the way in which we see our Victorian heritage today. Thank you.